It's 3 a.m. You wake up. No loud noise. No obvious reason. You roll over, check the clock. Again. And if this has started happening more often lately, especially if you're somewhere in your late 30s, 40s, or early 50s, you might be wondering, why this time? Why now? For some women, especially those around the perimenopause years, hormones may be a big part of that answer. Today I want to share some evidence-based explanations that researchers have been exploring. Welcome to the Pause Point. This channel exists to make sense of perimenopause and menopause. So today we're focusing on one question. Why do some women start waking at 2, 3, or 4 a.m. during perimenopause? First, if this is happening to you, you are far from alone. Sleep disruption is one of the most commonly reported symptoms during the menopausal transition. One of the landmark studies in this area came from the SWAN Study, one of the most comprehensive long-term research programs on midlife women's health ever conducted. A 2008 paper led by Dr. Howard Kravitz found that sleep problems were reported by around 39 to 47% of perimenopausal women. And even when researchers accounted for things like age, health, stress, and lifestyle, the hormonal transition itself still appeared to matter independently. That doesn't mean hormones explain every sleep issue. Sleep can be affected by stress, alcohol, medical conditions, and more. But one pattern shows up again and again in the research, not difficulty falling asleep, but an issue with recurring waking in the second half of the night. The first piece of this puzzle relates to the hormone progesterone. Most of us learn about progesterone as being a reproductive hormone. And it is, but it has a second job, one that probably few of us know about. In your brain, progesterone actually converts into a compound that works on the exact same receptor system that prescription sleep medications target. When progesterone is metabolized in the body, one of its downstream compounds interacts with GABA receptors. GABA is your brain's primary calming signal. It reduces neural excitability and promotes the transition into sleep. In straightforward terms, progesterone helps your brain calm down enough to sleep and stay asleep. Here is where perimenopause comes in. Progesterone is produced in our bodies after ovulation. Every month you ovulate, your body gets a surge of progesterone in the second half of your cycle. But as perimenopause progresses, ovulation becomes less and less reliable, and when you don't ovulate, you don't produce progesterone. A 5-year study following 108 women through the perimenopause transition found that by late perimenopause, more than 60% of cycles were producing no progesterone at all. That is not a small shift. That is the majority of your monthly cycles no longer generating the compound your brain relies on to stay calm and stay asleep. So if you're sleeping through the first part of the night and waking somewhere around 2 or 3 a.m., that is what a progesterone deficit can look like in practice. Your brain's natural calming buffer is no longer being produced consistently. So if progesterone could be one part of the story, why does it so often seem like when you wake and look at the clock, the number starts with a 3? Researchers point to a second hormone being involved, cortisol. Cortisol often gets called the stress hormone, but it's more accurate to think of it as one of the body's wakefulness and alertness signals. Under normal conditions, cortisol follows a daily rhythm, lower overnight while you sleep, and gradually rising toward morning to prepare us to wake. What the research suggests is that during perimenopause, as reproductive hormones shift, that rhythm can become disrupted. A 2021 Swiss perimenopause study followed 127 women over 13 months and found a direct association between declining progesterone levels and increased cortisol across the transition. What the researchers observed was that the reproductive hormone system and the body's stress response system appear to be closely connected. When one shifts, the other can follow. For some women, this may mean that the cortisol rise that is supposed to happen gently around 6 a.m. can begin happening much earlier in the night instead. And when that early alertness signal arrives in a brain that no longer has its progesterone buffer, there is nothing to absorb it. There is another reason I wanted to make this video, because sleep disruption is often treated as if it exists on its own. But sleep changes rarely stay contained to sleep. If you have also been noticing other things that are causing you concern, like walking into rooms and forgetting why, losing words halfway through sentences, researchers have been looking into the sleep connection. Researchers studying cognition and menopause have written about the role sleep may play in memory and verbal processing changes during the transition. Dr. Pauline Mackey, one of the leading researchers in this area, published a clinical guidance paper in 2022 in Climacteric, the Journal of the International Menopause Society, which found robust evidence for a causal relationship between sleep disruption and verbal learning and memory difficulties. Not just a correlation, a causal relationship. The mechanism is this. During deep sleep, the brain consolidates memory and clears metabolic waste. When that sleep is fragmented, as it can be when progesterone is low, that process is disrupted. So if you are experiencing both the 3 a.m. wake-ups and the brain fog, they may not be two separate problems. They may be two expressions of the same hormonal shift. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, this is interesting, but what do I actually do? I think these are 3 good places to start. First, start noticing and tracking patterns. Tracking will help you identify if things stand out. And if you decide to talk to your GP, you have real data at hand to support that discussion. Second, look at some lifestyle habits. Alcohol is worth understanding. That glass of wine can be relaxing in the evening and it can help you fall asleep. But as your body processes it through the night, that sedative effect wears off. Your brain overcorrects and swings toward alertness later in the night, when we now know progesterone is already less available. The result, a bad night's sleep. Exercise does support the menopause transition, but did you know that a high-intensity session after 6 in the evening can elevate cortisol for several hours, which might be a factor worth considering? Third, if sleep disruption is affecting your quality of life, talk to your GP. Sleep deserves to be taken seriously. You don't need to wait until you're completely exhausted to visit your doctor to have a talk about what is happening. If there is one thing I want you to take away from today, it is that you are not alone and you can take comfort in knowing that there really is more happening in your body than you probably were aware of. Perimenopause changes a lot in your body, and understanding those changes doesn't solve everything, but it can change how you feel about yourself while you move through it. And that is what the pause point is here for. If this video helped, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment to let me know if you've noticed any of these changes yourself.